For our purposes today, we'll define onboarding simply as bringing in data from some outside source into some specific well-known system. Source could be an external client, an internal customer from some other department, or really just any sort of data provider. The most common example for onboarding is when you operate a business where you need to take data from your clients and move it into your system or platform where you can operate on it and presumably return something of value, perhaps some analysis or a report. Maybe you're switching clients onto your proprietary ops platform. The data is likely coming from someplace outside of your control, so you can't depend on it being in any known or consistent format or any level of quality. So onboarding is a critical activity to get right. The onboarding experience from your customer's perspective is often a first impression of you as a vendor. They've just signed on with you and of course are eager to get going. So central is this first impression of the onboarding experience that it often begins before they are even a client. When you're pursuing a new customer, you want to make a good first impression on them as a prospect, a potential customer. You're essentially onboarding a prospect into a client. So you want to convey the value that your onboarding process is going to offer your prospect, right? How fast is it going to be? How painful? What level of effort is the client going to be expected to exert to get this onboarding going? If the solution requires continuous transfers, what is that ongoing exchange going to look like? Will the whole process be manual or automated, or even better, automated and instant, right? All these are values that you can convey to your prospective clients in terms of getting them on board with you as a provider. Then, of course, once they become a client, you want to live up to that first impression that you set in pre-sales. Avoid delays, issues, miscues during this critical initial phase when they're saying, they're asking themselves, did I make the right decision? So we need to make sure that our onboarding process matches those pre-sale expectations. And we provide fast and efficient onboarding experience. And interestingly enough, that speed and an efficiency that so affects that onboarding process experience is just as valuable to you as the onboarder as it is to your client as the onboardee, right? Your company will benefit if you've got an efficient process for onboarding that drives down the cost and allows you to scale up and get more clients, into your world faster. Right. So there are some challenges, of course. The formats and structure of the data that your clients are going to send you, and more particularly, the quality of the data that they're going to send you is an unknown, right? You can't depend on a particular level of quality. In fact, what we've seen is that the motivation for your client coming to you in the first place might be rooted in data quality issues that they're experiencing, right? They may have grown unsatisfied with their current solution, perhaps some aging legacy system, something customized. And part of that dissatisfaction may stem maybe not from the performance of the system, but the fact that data quality issues have crept into their data and their processes over time, right? There may be, and there often is, a sort of a ill-founded perception or assumption that simply moving to a new platform will cause these data quality issues to magically, disappear and implicitly be resolved during the onboarding process. So we need to be able to be prepared for that, to identify those data quality issues, clean the data up on its way in, rather than propagating those issues into the new system. So who's going to do this hard work related to getting the onboarding right? We want the process to be as easy as possible for the new clients, We don't want to force them into providing data in some specific format or pre-cleansed. We want to remove as much as possible any burden or any obstacle that prevents or slows them down from getting on the platform. Ideally, love to be able to tell our new client, hey, just give us the data, whatever format that's convenient for you, and we'll figure it out. That said, we also want to make it as easy as possible on ourselves, right? On our own staff. The goal here is to avoid using expensive engineering resources to custom build one-off onboarding solutions for each new client that we need to bring on board. Instead, we want to create a process that can be operated by less technical staff, something simple that doesn't require a developer, programmer, or someone with some deeper technical savvy in order to be successful getting data on board. So all that brings us, sets the stage really for our value proposition, which is that CloverDX platform can help you implement a fully automated onboarding process that's going to allow you to onboard more customers and do it quickly and efficiently without consuming expensive software engineering resources, and ultimately providing a higher value product, not maybe just the specific service that you provide to your clients, but the process of becoming a customer, right? That higher value can come from a lot of areas, such as the ability to do some continuous onboarding. Maybe if you've got a system where you need to get initial load of data from your clients, but then subsequent loads from them on a regular basis, and or by considering the ability to do onboarding live data as well as any sort of explicitly exported data that was purpose created just for the transfer, right? So there's a lot of areas where CloverDX as a platform can help you solve all of these onboarding challenges, right? So let's take 1 minute to look at the platform so that our discussion, how we can actually help with onboarding, will make a bit more sense. CloverDX is our data management platform, right? Designed specifically to build and operate data pipelines. It can be used to replace or augment any legacy solutions you have. We can handle some complex data scenarios and deal with fairly messy data. Platform is very good at dealing with inconsistent data formats and data quality. All of this, as you've likely already realized, can be common challenges when you try to onboard someone to your platform, to your system. Platform itself, CloverDX, has two pieces, as you can see in this infographic. Lower left, there's a design piece. CloverDX Designer, that's our visual, allows us to do visual development of onboarding jobs. Well, it's a low-code environment, and I'm going to be showing you some screenshots that come out of this design environment so that you can get a sense of how we visually represent onboarding jobs. The other piece of the platform shown here in the blue background, that's CloverDX Server. That's going to handle automation so that the onboarding jobs that we design can run automatically and unattended. Together, we use those two components, Server and Designer, to connect to almost any type of data, ingest it, shape it, cleanse it, and write it to almost any target. So it's a powerful platform. But we also have in-house services team that can help you design and build your solution, right? And you can decide how deeply, if at all, you want to engage our services team, right? We can train you how to use the CloverDX platform so that you can build your solution yourself. Or we can temporarily augment your team and help you build. Or if you want, you can delegate the entire onboarding project to us and we'll build it for you. So that's the platform. Take a moment to consider what we consider to be sort of the lowest common denominator of a data integration job. In other words, we found that most data integration workflows can be distilled into these 4 phases. Ingest, taking the data from some initial source system, whether it's an API to an enterprise app or database or any other of a variety of places where your data can originate. Ingest includes being able to handle whatever structure those endpoints might provide, even if that structure might be dynamic and change, over time. Ingest phase is where we also want to be able to handle, endpoints that are unavailable or uncooperative, which may require, a retry, right? That should all be handled in what we call the ingest phase of a workflow. Ingest usually followed by a transform phase, where you've got to take the data from the source endpoint, shape it, apply some rules to get it into a different shape that you need for your business purposes. We have strong automation here. We got capabilities to do automatic mapping, but we also provide the ability for the job designer to control what that mapping looks like, to introduce complex business rules, and to transform that data as it's mapped. Validation, another important phase of most data integration jobs. You've got the data pulled and transformed. Very often we want to examine those records to make sure they meet a certain level of quality, applying business rules to make sure that the data is really appropriate for introduction into your system. If they're not, pull those records out and do something else with them before you finally move into the last phase of delivery, which of course is to deliver the results to some target endpoint. Storage system and API delivery in our world, we like to think of it as the actual delivery of a transformed data set, as well as monitoring the process to make sure that that data gets to where it's supposed to be, and some sort of audit to record that fact, right? So almost every data integration challenge that we see can at some point be distilled into these 4 phases, whether those are migrations, system integrations, warehouse building, or as in our case today, onboarding new data or new clients into your system. So let's look at this. Let's take this sort of 4-phased common flow and see if we can see it in a real onboarding process that we developed for a client, in this case, in the fintech space, right? So client comes to us with wanting some help for building their automated onboarding process. Specifically, they want a complete process, one that handles onboarding from start to finish, from detecting the availability of data to be onboarded all the way through to loading the target system. Specific steps that we needed to address: detect that there's new data that is ready to be onboarded, and figure out, inspect the layout and format of that data, then do the read, of course, the map, the transform, assess quality before finally loading it to the target system. And want to detect issues and log progress as we go through each of those steps. But probably most important is that we want this sort of framework, these 7 steps, to be a reusable process, right? A single generic data pipeline that will do these things for any data from any client, right? We lay these steps on their side, and it already starts to maybe look like a data pipeline. So now here's our first look at some actual CloverDX product, right? This is CloverDX's designer IDE, loaded up as though someone was building a top-level onboarding data job. You can see the menu items along the top and various controls and panels around the edges all support the idea of developing in a low-code, highly visual way a onboarding data pipeline. Right, let's zoom in and just look at the actual pipeline itself. Again, the steps should start to become visible, right? Detecting the data that's available. Here we're matching that data from a particular client with a configuration file before we do a read, transform, validate, and push to the target. Errors can occur at any point along the way. You can see that most of these stages have secondary edges coming out of them. That's where error information arrives. We collect those errors, build a log entry, and place that log entry someplace where our operators can, react. Right, successful ingestions get logged as well, and then there's actually some post-processing that's being done after the data is successfully onboarded. You can call some other process or kick off some other downstream process to further operate or somehow act on the fact that new data has been injected into the system. So now I mentioned in this process an interesting step, which was matching a client's data with a specific configuration file. Right, that's what's being done here in these two steps. Right, we detected data became available, so we got some data from some client. We want to go look up a configuration file to give us instructions on how the rest of the pipeline should behave. Right, so that's what's being done in these two phases. So a word or two about configuration files, because it's a very key practice for developing a single pipeline that's going to work for many different clients. The idea of using configuration files to hold all the client-specific detail. When you abstract that client detail out of the pipeline in some external config, you're leaving behind essentially a generic orchestration framework, right? Now, the configuration itself can be stored anywhere, flat files, database tables. We often like to use Excel for these configurations for several reasons. They're human readable. They actually can serve a dual purpose. In addition to instructing the pipeline how to behave, we can share this document, the Excel sheet with the end client. Say, hey, look, this is how we're about ready to treat your data, and if there are any issues, that document can serve as a sort of a launching point for discussions with the client on how the ingest may have not worked as was expected, right? And then of course, Excel's universally known. It's a lot easier to allow less technical staff, right, to build these config files, to modify them, and to actually use them to operate the pipeline. I have a real configuration file here we can take a quick look at. Again, we're in the fintech space here, looking to process financial transactions. Config file that we did for this particular solution had 3 tabs. You can see across the bottom here, overview, attributes, data quality. First tab, just some metadata about the client who's sending us this data, what their name is, a unique ID for them, some contact information about who to reach out to if there are issues, and some other metadata about expected arrival times for particular data, right? Second tab has got the meat of the mapping, right? The records, the fields that we expect to be in the file that the client is providing us, the data types that we're going to be treating them as, some additional actual rules. This column E over here is specifying whether or not we should encrypt a particular field and land it in our target system as encrypted, so we don't expose any private information. And maybe whether or not we should, as we're reading the file, we should allow nulls to be appear in the data set, right? So configuration specifically for this client's data set. Last tab on the configuration was some data quality rules, right? So we can extract the client-specific data quality rules, get them into a spreadsheet where the customer can understand them, and then Clover can actually translate into runtime business rules. It could be at the file level. This file better, have a certain number of records in it, a certain number of ID fields that are null. Particular fields can have individual data quality assessments, but all of this data quality rules for the client's specific data extracted out of the pipeline and placed into the spreadsheet. So all of the information we need to onboard a particular client data set now in this file, right? The pipeline uses this file when a new client data set arrives. We match it with this config file, and then the actual ingestion can begin, right? So ingestion, right? That's the next step, highlighted here in the center, the actual core of the processing, reading the data and processing it, getting it into our system, right? So let's dive through this particular segment of the top level pipeline and look at the underlying Clover job there. Right? That looks like this, sort of complicated. So let's try to look at it a piece at a time and point out some interesting parts, right? So first of all, a happy path, right? What we want is to follow the red line here, which is, to read the file, do the transformations, do the quality assessment, and then get it out to the target output format, right? So that's the way we want all the data to flow through our system. Other pieces worth noting, first, the first step, which is reading the file. Remember, this is a generic pipeline that works on any client file, right? So with CloverDX, we're going to allow you to design pipelines with reader components like this one that don't have any a priori knowledge of the content that they're reading. That information was extracted from the configuration file and used to configure this reader so it knows what it's supposed to be expecting in the file. And that happens at runtime. This upper section here, quick record count of the file. Make sure that we have roughly the number of records that we're expecting. If not, maybe reject the file. If it doesn't have any records, if it's an empty file or only has like a dozen records in it, that's not a file that we want to introduce into the system. In this case, we were looking for a range, say between 1,000 and 1,500 records is what we were expecting in this in this data set, incoming data set. Anything that violates that, we will simply stop the process. That's a configuration parameter, right? It's client specific that allows us to do that sort of data quality check. Transformation, as I mentioned earlier, this particular client had a key requirement that some of the data that was coming in from their clients needed to be encrypted before it landed in their systems. So, in our systems, right? So this particular phase of the pipeline, identifying which fields needed to be encrypted, again, from the configuration file, encrypting them, and then reintegrating them with the rest of the record set before pushing down to the next step. Next step, data quality, right? Do the data quality checks, make sure they're, a particular date field better not have any dates in the future. This particular field better only have one of a set of allowed values that are, specified in some lookup. It's going to be a mix of baseline rules for your platform as well as maybe client-specific rules for this particular data set, right? Records that fail data quality are logged along with the reason they're rejected. The fact that we found invalid records at all is registered with the main job orchestration. That's what's going on with this yellow component here. But then more importantly, we're creating a file, a human readable file of the records that were rejected and why they were rejected. Those records can then be evaluated, corrected, and reprocessed. So we have some ability now to rapidly re-execute our onboarding process, identify those bad records, fix them, rerun the pipeline, all without needing to have a developer step in. Right? Then, of course, the last step, writing the transformed and validated records to our target endpoint. So when development of our whole pipeline, of the top level orchestration, as well as this detailed ingestion, when that's complete, the whole process is ready to be moved from CloverDX Designer over to CloverDX Server, where it can operate in production, right? Our CloverDX Server will allow you to run these onboarding jobs automatically and unattended, as well as monitoring those executions, logging their results, and alerting if there are any errors that occur. So I'll pivot now and show you a couple of screenshots of CloverDX's server component and how it's handling, all of the automation of this job that we've built, right? So let's talk about running these onboarding jobs automatically and unattended. The most common way to do that is with our scheduler, right? So here's a screenshot of the CloverDX server console where we're looking at the schedule for an onboarding service, right? We can see graphically when the last run was, when the next run is supposed to be. We can enable or disable the schedule, or we can simply click on a button and ask the process to kick off immediately without waiting until the next scheduled time. So all that available to you in the console. Another interesting feature of the server, a design of Clover in general, is that all of our onboarding jobs, the jobs that you create, we will automatically generate REST endpoints so that you can interact with those jobs on demand. So instead of running on a schedule, you can run when you need to, right? Particularly useful in the onboarding process if you need to reprocess a certain data set or send through a set of corrected records. Here, for example, a little web form that sits on top of the API endpoint for our onboarding job. We can specify a set of records, and maybe in addition to the set of records, we want to change the configuration file. We can specify a new configuration file, a couple of other parameters, mash the button, and we've got a non-technical user, a less technical user anyways, ability to be able to affect when an onboarding job runs and the criteria that is being used to actually execute it. Right. See this a lot for error correction, right? Bring in 5,000 records, a few hundred of them fail. We know what they did. We know why they failed. We fix them. We put them back at the front of the pipeline, and it just runs again. And this time just with the corrected record set. Right. So lots of ways to automate or control the execution profile when our onboarding jobs are actually going to run. We want to monitor the whole system. Clover has a dashboard that will allow you at-a-glance status of how your onboarding jobs are behaving. Right. So if you see something red, for example, here, that says, one of the onboarding jobs has come up with an issue. We know at a glance if there's something going on. We click this little card. We can get immediately to detailed execution history for that particular instance of that particular job. We know why the job failed. We know when it failed. We know where it failed because we have a graphical representation. The same representation that we had in our design environment now is showing you how much data flowed through the pipeline before it failed and where in the pipeline the failure occurred, making it very easy to triage and diagnose issues with your automated onboarding jobs. Okay. I'll finish with a quick story of onboarding success from one of our CloverDX clients. Zywave provides a full range of cloud-based services to insurance agencies. For them, getting a new client required moving data from whatever legacy system they might have their insurance business operating in onto the Zywave platform. They came to us because the process of getting their clients onto the Zywave platform was engineering intensive, actually to the point of slowing down their ability to accept new clients. So we worked with them to design a generic automated onboarding framework that could be operated by someone outside of their core engineering team. Results, of course, were positive, speeding the time it takes to onboard, improving their customers' experience, as well as reducing the load on their engineering team. You can see the quote here. They were able to fairly quickly reduce their onboarding pipeline, and most importantly, remove their engineering team from being what was considered the bottleneck for getting clients on board. So we would love the opportunity to talk to you about your specific onboarding processes and how CloverDX can make them automatic, efficient, and help you set and meet those critical first impressions with your clients.